Welcome to the Galactic Core Podcast. Here to review the latest films and TV shows from all your favorite intergalactic universes. Now, it's time to get your geek on. Please welcome your host, the prophesized chosen one. It's Andy.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Galactic Core Podcast. I'm Andy, as always, your host, as I'm here to talk you through all the best things from Star Wars, Marvel, DC, anything else nerdy and geeky in between that takes my fancy. This week, we are continuing our coverage of The Acolyte and also The Boys Season 4. Both of these shows are showing simultaneously at the moment, so some great stuff that we get to cover. I'm going to be joined by a guest later on to cover episode 4 of The Acolyte. That is going to be Joey from the Krypton to Alderaan podcast. He's been on the show a couple of times. It's great to have him back on. He's such a big Star Wars fan. I know that he's got some good things to go through The Acolyte with me, so we're going to be looking forward to getting into that later on. But right now, we're going to jump straight into it. We've got Season 4, Episode 4 of The Boys. One of the best shows of recent times, and it has spawned one of the greatest villains of all time in TV history, I think, with Homelander. So a lot to cover in this episode. A lot happened. So we've got some things to jump in, and I've got a few thoughts for you on how I feel things have been going, where things are going to go, and obviously what may happen towards the end. We know that we've got Season 5 to come, and then that will be it for The Boys, been confirmed. A little bit of news on that front is Jared Padalecki is in talks to join Season 5 of The Boys. For those of you who are unfamiliar, he was Sam Winchester from Supernatural. Eric Kripke, one of the forerunners for The Boys, obviously was on Supernatural as well. That's why we see so many Supernatural actors that do join The Boys. And obviously, we've already got Dean Winchester, that's already appeared in The Boys as Soldier Boy. For some reason, his real life name jumped out of my head for a minute. Jensen Ackles, there we go. So if Jared is going to be joining Season 5 of The Boys, we really do hope, or I hope at least anyway, that it's going to be as an opposing role to Soldier Boy, and we get to see them face off at some point. Great to see Sam and Dean Winchester facing off against each other rather than being allies. So I really do hope that that's something we get to see, but exciting news on that front. But as for this episode, a lot happened in this episode. And it was almost like throughout this episode, everyone was sort of confronting their past in a way. So Frenchie with Colin and the fact that he killed his family. Kimiko facing her past with the Shining Light people. And then we've got obviously Huey going with his mum, Butcher sort of being haunted by premonitions of Becca and his past there, and obviously Homelander going back to where it all began with him, back to the room that he essentially almost grew up in and was constantly tortured in a way as a child. So let's just touch on Homelander, shall we? So, as I mentioned in this episode, he heads back, at the end of the last episode, he's confronted by his sort of alter egos in the mirror and says he needs to go back to where it all began. So we see him turn up at this underground facility that Vought has, and he seems to obviously know a few people there. And he turns up with a cake, and he's there to be all nice, but we know Homelander's nice is just a front really for when he's pissed off and wants to cause some havoc. So he arrives at this facility, and it's basically, as we saw, when he was a child, he was tortured there. They basically, wanted to find out ways that they could harm him or anything like that, or if he could be harmed. And all the tests were done on him. And this is the head popping, dick lasering, sort of psychopath behavior that we've come to expect from Homelander. Now he knows that he's basically in charge of everything, and he's going about everything the way that he wants to do it. So he turns up there and he talks to the one guy who says that, whilst he was put in an oven and they whacked it up, whilst he didn't burn, he could still feel all of that pain. And he basically makes this guy stand in the oven and roast him to death. And then we've got one of the other guys who basically says he used to call him Squirt because he caught him wanking off essentially one day, and tells him he's got to wank off in front of everyone whilst they stand there and laugh. And when he can't do it, he basically laser eyes his dick off. And the worst circumcision you've ever seen in your life, to be fair. So, and then I can't remember her name off the top of my head either. Is it Valerie, something like that, shows up, and or Barbara, sorry, and someone that was there doing all these experiments on him when he grew up. And then we get told the story that basically when Homelander was born, he burst out of his mother's stomach, killing her instantly, and floated in the air with the umbilical cord still attached, and laser-eyed, quite a few people in the room, doctors and nurses. So she explains that he's always had the power to leave that facility. He's always had the power to destroy them if he wanted to, but he never did get to, or he never did, sorry. And that's because Vought brought in the best psychologist in the world to make sure that he had this deep-seated need for love. Whilst Homelander is going about at the moment trying to say that he's not human and his son isn't human, and he's eradicating the humanness from himself. But Vought made sure that he needs that need for approval, that need for validation. It did get me thinking a little bit that maybe fear is his new type of validation. People having fear of him, because whilst he's in a room with people, and at times he's even called them sycophants for basically doing anything that he says because everyone's too scared of him. It seems that if he's ever in a room with anyone that's sort of not scared of him, with the exception of maybe like Butcher and Soldier Boy, he doesn't really care about them, or he's not focused on them. He only wants to focus on the people that he can control, manipulate, and eventually, rule through fear. So clever by Vought of using that need for him to, because he didn't have any parental figures growing up. He was just put in a room and tortured in various ways. So making sure he's got that deep-seated need for love, very clever. And they've used that for their advantage for a long time now. Whether he's growing out of that and he's trying to really show that he doesn't need it, because obviously at the end of this episode, he locks Barbara in that room. He's sealed it shut, and with all the dead bodies of the scientists around. And this again, the acting from Anthony Starr in this episode was absolutely brilliant. He has done such a top-notch job with his acting with Homelander for this series. But again, it just goes to show with Homelander that is he past this need for validation and this need for love, and he's trying to move past that on his own. He's not really connecting with his son Ryan, and who has that sort of human element, that sympathy element. When he accidentally killed the guy in the staged sort of bank robbery, he couldn't get past that. And yet Ryan, did have a good mother, a loving mother to be there for him when he was growing up, and Homelander's not had that. So they're sort of opposite ends of the emotion spectrum in a way. And Homelander's sort of cold and doesn't really connect with Ryan in that sort of way, and yet he obviously does manage to connect that way with Butcher. So interesting to see where that part of his story goes. What is interesting as well is because we know that Soldier Boy is Homelander's father, who's his mother? Because Barbara says that it was some runaway that that they used, and whether this was just in the term of this is his actual mother, or whether this was a surrogate that they used. Because at the end of the day, Vought were trying to create the most powerful superhero that they could, and you've got Soldier Boy's DNA. Why would you use just a random runaway to be the mother, so to speak? So if they really were trying to create it, I don't believe that this runaway would be his mother. I believe that she was a surrogate, and there's lots of hints, to be fair, that the potential mother could have been Stormfront. Soldier Boy talked about the fact that he hooked up with this chick Liberty, which is what Stormfront's name used to be, and then that she disappeared and went out of the public eye for a while, sort of around the late 70s. And we know that Homelander was born around about 1981, I think. So, did they use Stormfront's DNA? He seems to have some of her abilities in terms of laser eyes and the fact that he can fly, along with Soldier Boy's strength and stuff. So maybe combining the two DNA of those people created Homelander, And if you're really trying to push Homelander over the edge, what better way to do that? Because obviously he does hook up with Stormfront. And what better way to do that than to have him find out that Stormfront was his mum, and that he was basically hooking up with his mum. So could be something that we see, whether this series or next series, that they reveal who is the true mother of Homelander. If it is Stormfront, I'm going to call it, but obviously don't stick to my predictions. They're not always that good, to be fair. But it was just something that, after doing a bit of digging around, that potentially could be there. The Stormfront Soldier Boy hooking up and Stormfront disappearing and emulating some of the powers that Homelander has. So who knows on that front, but Homelander took a step forward in this episode in terms of the way that he deals with things and the way that he just doesn't care anymore. He's just going to do what he wants to do. So, which brings us, to be fair, it was talking to someone who does what they want to do, Billy Butcher. So, obviously, it's been revealed in the series that he's only got now about 6 months to live. And obviously he seems to be suffering more and more, as we see in this episode. He falls over in the shower. He's having more and more hallucinations of Becca. But in a way, he's sort of telling him to fight and to keep on going. And we get that incident when he's snooping around Firecracker's trailer. He comes face to face with Ezekiel, the priest, or the guy who's obviously giving lots of speeches and sermons. And he's getting strangled. And we see various times through this episode, especially at this point when he's being throttled, this parasite going in and out of his forehead and his body. And then all of a sudden, the next thing that we see with him is that he wakes up, he completely blacked out, and Ezekiel has essentially been exploded. So I think people have been describing it as like a Venom type situation where he's got some sort of parasite or something in him. And that parasite is exploding out and sort of stopping Butcher from dying at various points and defending him, and that's what killed Ezekiel. Whether this is a side effect from the temp V that he took, or whether it's revealed in this episode as well that he did take compound V in an effort to try and cure himself, whether that's a side effect of that and this is turning into what is actually his power, again, something that we need to wait and see, but that seems to be the most likely scenario, isn't it? That this parasite is essentially communicating with him via hallucinations of Becca. And that's what we have to wait and see where it goes. It seems the most likely scenario, though, doesn't it? So, also with Butcher, before this sort of situation happened, I was sort of favouring this theory that Marie from Gen V, who is the other suit we know that can control blood in the same way that Victoria Newman does, that she was going to be the one that would somehow save Butcher, because I don't believe, obviously, they're going to kill him off at the end of this series. So before this episode, I would have said that was the odds-on theory, that Marie is the one that somehow is going to help cure him. But with this new sort of parasite kicking around and him having potentially powers now, it wouldn't go outside of the realm that, he's not actually dying. It's just his body adjusting to whatever this parasite is. Or maybe he was dying and mixing the compound V with it has created this parasite thing. So we will have to wait and see with that. But Huey in this episode he's going through a lot. He's going with the situation, obviously, his dad and his mum. There's been a theory kicking around again that his mum is basically hallucination in his mind. And is there to counteract what he sort of wants to do. He's someone else that took Temp V, and whether, we don't think he took as much as Butcher did, so therefore maybe he's getting hallucinations, but he's not having the rest of the side effects that Butcher got. But, up until this episode, again, it was the theory that she was a hallucination of his own mind. She hasn't sort of directly interacted with anyone outside of Huey, so there was obviously a slight bit where, the nurse maybe looked at her a couple of times and sort of, the mum nodded at her and she sort of took that. But again, that could just be a slight sort of way the camera was filming it, and whether she's still hallucination. He obviously gets some compound V because he thinks he can use it to cure his dad, and he makes a deal with A-Train to get it. He obviously talking to A-Train and says that, he will forgive him. They're squared for everything that A-Train's put Huey through in terms of killing his girlfriend and stuff like that. And A-Train does obviously manage to get the compound V while snooping around Homelander's apartment, where he runs into Ashley as well, who apparently was taking a shit in Homelander's toilet. I think there was something else that she was sneaking around because she's obviously trying to find a way to get out of this organization without being killed by Homelander. And it's obvious they make a kind of deal to keep a little secret between them. They were both in his apartment doing stuff, but A-Train sticks to his word. He gives Huey the compound V, and A-Train's sort of like, we're not going to be square, are we? You're not going to forgive me for all this shit. And Huey admits, he's like, nope, I was going to tell you to get fucked, but you know what? I don't want to have to hate anyone anymore. And he shakes his hand and tells them that they're even and that they're square. So that seems to be, whether that's the end of their beef or not, we'll have to wait and see. But it seems, that Huey's the one that doesn't want to have to suffer anymore, and he wants to let all this stuff go, and he wants to do things for the better. But this episode does end with the fact that he was going to give his dad the compound V. He sort of chooses not to and puts it in his pocket, puts his jacket down. And then when he comes back, sort of a short while later, as he's talking to his mum, we see the sort of compound V going through the drip and into his dad, and his dad sort of eyes pop open right at the very end. So again, if this is a hallucination of his mum, maybe it's the fact that his alter ego of his mum did give his dad the compound V, and she's doing the actions that he doesn't want to do, or if she was the one that gave him compound V, did she take it from Huey's jacket, somehow knowing it was there, and give it to him, or did she have her own supply of compound V that she gave to him? She stated earlier on, a few episodes ago, that she did work for Vought, whether it was just selling sort of their multivitamin type stuff, but she did work. Whether she has a larger role within Vought that is being kept secret, again, unfortunately, all things that we need to wait and see. But there does seem to be a thing there that if she is real and she's not a hallucination, that there is definitely information that she's keeping to herself and not admitting. So we will have to wait and see what does happen on that end. But, will Huey's dad now have powers of his own? Will it just have cured him? That'll be exciting to see whether he joins the super crew or not. And then two sort of things to just sort of clarify that we saw at the end in this episode. Obviously, Frenchie finally admits that he did kill Colin's family. He just couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Colin beats the shit out of him, and Frenchie is happy to die from the guilt of it. But, Colin stops himself and tells him if he ever sees him again, he'll kill him. So I don't think he'll be hanging around the Starlight home anymore. And then Kimiko faces down when she's with Huey, with the Shining Light crew sort of trying to take her out, and this girl that she seems to have a past with, that she apparently dragged into the fighting pits or something and gave her this big scar that we see on her face. She's scheduled to appear in one more episode, so we will get a conclusion to that story. But continue on with Kimiko's little side story here about sort of closing off her history with the Shining Light. So, everyone in that episode kind of getting to confront their past a bit and take things on from it and either let things go or finding a way to try and move on. So one other interesting point just to discuss quickly about this episode is Sister Sage. We got an answer to her lobotomy situation from last week's episode where she, we saw the metal rod at the side that had the blood on it. When she hooked up with the Deep, he's obviously trying to hook up with her again, and she's like, when she's her normal self, she's like, you absolutely disgust me, stay away from me. And then when he visits her later in the evening, she basically explains to him that her brain keeps growing essentially, and that she has to the only way she can feel normal every now and again is that she has to give herself a brain lobotomy to do that. So she basically talks him through doing it, and we get to see this kind of great scene where he pierces obviously next to her eye, squishes it about a bit to cause some damage, and then she essentially gets dumbed down for a few hours before her brain regenerates and she's back to being the normal part of herself. Interesting though that her regenerative abilities only apply to her brain, because she says, if you damage my eye or lose the eye, only the brain regenerates. So if she was to get injured in any other way, that wouldn't heal. It's only her brain that does that. But always funny that she has to lobotomize herself to hook up with the deep, and she's happy to just lose her brain for a couple of hours in order to let herself go a bit, relax, and feel a bit more normal before everything comes back again. And she's got this huge burden of intelligence on her. So lots of theories last week about whether Homelander had lobotomized her because he saw her as a threat, or whether she does it to herself for any particular reason. We get that answer now. She just does it to make herself feel a bit more normal for the time being. So that brings us to an end of episode 4. So we're halfway through this series now, and lots of side plots alongside the main point. I mean, I didn't even get to talk about Firecracker and Starlight, obviously facing off against each other, information being revealed. The show's sort of working hard this season to make us not particularly like Starlight in a way. Firecracker's more popular than ever. We found out the reasons that Firecracker hates Annie for the things that she used to do when they did pageants when they were a kid. Annie refusing to tell the rest of the group why Firecracker hates her so much, and then the big reveal, obviously, that her and Huey had an abortion a few months back, and then she can't take that anymore and goes out there and just beats the shit out of Firecracker. And it's obviously all filmed. Lots of people. Obviously, there was like a live feed with like over 2.5 million people watching or something, and people saying they lost respect for her, that she's now become the villain. Skipping over the fact completely that Firecracker is sort of technically a paedophile because she did some inappropriate stuff with a 15-year-old kid. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to see whether there's any more impact on, because her coming out and revealing it and making an apology straight away should not roll over the fact that she basically assaulted a child. But obviously it seems like the way they're going with their political story, it's only going to cover Starlight's situation, and it's not going to focus on Firecracker's misdemeanor, shall we say. So interesting to see where they go with Starlight in terms of whether they're making us sort of hate her a bit more because she's covering everything up and can't admit to her own faults. But President Robert Singer basically distances himself from her instead of using her like he was doing previously to try and get the anti-soup sort of bill in place. And he's like, I can't be associated with you anymore. See you later. So interesting to see where they go with that as well. But as I said, halfway through this series now, lots of side plots that we're getting sort of moving forward now, as well as what's Homelander going to be doing. Is he just going to go full on nuts crazy, or is he going to be pulled back from the brink somehow? Are we going to get Soldier Boy at any point in this in series 4? I really hope so. The Gen V lot, we keep getting them mentioned every now and again. They sort of talked about the Guardians of Godolkin, and we've seen Sam and Kate pop up in the trailer, so whether they've got to make an appearance at some point soon. Interesting to see what roles they play in the rest of this series, considering we are getting season 2 Gen V as well. But that's part 1 of this week's episode done. Join me back in a moment, and I will be here with part 2 to chat all about the Acolyte. So see you in a moment. And here we are with part 2 of this week's episode. We are here to discuss episode 4 of The Acolyte, so halfway through the series now. Of course, a fantastic Star Wars guest to be able to chat through everything and some of the series so far. He's been on a couple of episodes before, and I've been really, really privileged that he's decided to come on again. We did Ahsoka last year, the big episode 5, Anakin's World Between Worlds episode. You came on and also did a Clone Wars series review. That was absolutely amazing. So everyone, please welcome to the show the fantastic Joey from Krypton to Alderaan.
I love the little, always love the little sound effect there at the intro. Thanks so much for having me, Andy. It's great to be back here, and I'm excited to talk with you about The Acolyte. The first time we've really talked about the Acolyte in depth apart from some like social media back and forth. But yeah, excited to be here. Excited to talk in general about the show. Excited to talk about this episode specifically.
No, I'm absolutely happy that you're here to chat with me, man. Always good to get into Star Wars with people who know Star Wars, and that's not a dig at anyone else in my life that isn't into Star Wars or doesn't know maybe as much. But I know you're a man who knows this stuff, so it's good to be able to get into this with you. So, 4 episodes in, we're at the halfway mark already. This has gone quick. Only half a series left to go. Obviously, it's massive rumours about there being a season 2 already in the works. So whether they complete the story that we've started in this series or not, we don't know yet. But episodes 1 to 3, obviously it's been a very controversial show so far, whether it's review bombing, whether it's people calling it all sorts of ridiculous things, whether you're happy with it, whether you hate it. It's been probably the most talked about Star Wars show for some time, simply because of how divisive it has become. But what are your initial thoughts been on the first 3 episodes before we got to the latest one?
Yeah, I'll just come out and say it. I've been really enjoying this show. And I think, like with everyone, Krypton to Alderaan has been, uh, introduced to people who aren't necessarily liking the show and maybe wouldn't like the show. And I think there's a lot of maybe unfair conversations going on, even at 4 episodes in, right? We're going to talk maybe like about this episode specifically and what it means, and I always come at things from a perspective of like, this is what makes Star Wars special to me, so this is why I liked it or didn't like it, filtering it through that lens. But there does seem to be some maybe like unfair conversations about what the show is as a whole, with only being halfway or less than halfway through before the show was even out. But me personally, I've been really enjoying it so far. It's doing a lot for me. It's expanding my definition of Star Wars, which I'm always open to. Luckily, it's doing that in a good way. Again, this is personal for me, what I like and don't like. It's really hitting on a lot of things. It's our first like real Jedi show. It's set in the High Republic, which this is my High Republic shelf back here. I'm a big fan of the High Republic, so I was ready for that. And it's doing the emotional storytelling that I also love to see. So it's really checking a lot of boxes for me. That's not to say that it's perfect. It's not perfect. I'm not finding it perfect, but there's a lot of stuff I like, and so the stuff I like definitely outweighs the maybe some of the issues that I'm having with it overall. So that's my long winded way of saying I'm really enjoying it so far.
And that's really good to hear, to be fair. I mean, there's a couple of people from other podcasts that I'm friends with who are never anything but positive about so much of the Star Wars universe. Even if, there's things about the show they don't like, they will try and find the positives in the things that they don't like still. And you always come across as one of those people, to be fair, Joey. So it's always good to have that perspective, because unfortunately, social media and everything else just floods us with all the hate and all the dislike for it. So, I mean...
Yeah. 100%. And it's so easy. I mean, I don't know. There's definitely like a rant that I could go on here. What I tried to do and what I want the brand of Krypton to Alderaan is that we approach things critically. It's art. We want to look at, stuff like that critically, but the takes can be generous. We can find a generous way, or we can find a generous way to talk about it, or we can find a way to be generous with our takes. And that's what we really tried to do, and that's what I really tried to do, especially with Star Wars. And above all, it's Star Wars is something I love, and I want to love it, right? Like I want to love Star Wars stuff. And so that's the foundation that the rest of this is built on. Sometimes I don't. Haven't been the biggest fan of some of the live action series, but there's room to enjoy stuff, and there's room to have generous takes. And that's the way I try to approach this stuff.
And that's not a bad way to go about it at all. I mean, I posted a TikTok yesterday just talking about... it was more aimed at toxic Star Wars fans than anything else, but it ended up being, the most interacted and commented on post on TikTok I've ever had. Nice. Mostly by people telling me to shut the fuck up. Sure. and someone even having a dig at me because in last week's episode where the clip came from, I was wearing my my pink Kitty Razor headphones, and someone even having a go going, the headphone says it all. You've got no place to comment on this, and I'm
Give
just like,
me
cool.
a break.
Thanks for that kind of stuff. I was like, cool. I'll remember to wear my non-woke headphones next time for you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. So it's just. I want to look at the positivity. I mean, obviously, I love Star Wars. Everyone who listens to my show knows that it comes above every other type of fandom show, comic book, everything for me. So, I go into it wanting to love every part of it, and there's very little that I could probably say. I don't even like using the word hate. Like sometimes even the things I like to use the word I'm not fussed. So everyone,
Yeah.
I've talked quite a lot about if I had a ranking of all Star Wars projects, Solo's probably bottom of the list for me. And I don't hate it, I just don't care about it.
Sure.
It's not something I was that fussed about, not something I was like clamoring to see. Han Solo isn't maybe a top tier character for me personally.
Right.
So I'm just not fussed about it, but I don't hate it. I don't go out of my way to hate on it. The show has its definitely, as you said, ups and downs. Like the visuals have been stunning, which you would expect that maybe of all modern day Star Wars because of the technology we have and the money that Disney have to pump into it.
Sure.
Which, if you look at the counterparts over at Marvel, haven't necessarily had the best run of it with their CGI and stuff over the last few years. Whereas Marvel is always visually stunning no matter what. I mean, even going back to 2016 Rogue One, visually stunning film.
Yeah.
Up to what we're getting in here. As we know, it's the tail end of the High Republic era, so everything looks a bit cleaner, a bit sharper. The dress code's different. Even the Jedi Temple looks like it's had a good scrub. It looks a bit white and has a bit more gleam about it. But from the way I look at it, the dialogue has been a bit dull. It's not really been on point. Sometimes it's just a bit cringy. I don't think the episode today maybe improved on that too much. But again, we're at a time when the Jedi sort of don't really have anyone to challenge them. They're just there and they're very on the nose. Some of them are going to be a bit more relaxed. Some of them are going to be a lot more strict. And I think that's something we don't necessarily get to see in the prequel era because they've become, by that stage, obviously 100 years later, overly confident and overly arrogant, and therefore they're just too laid back about everything. So that's for me where sometimes the dialogue for this works because you'd expect them to, like someone like Yord, who's very strict and very about his appearance and by the book sort of way. Some of his dialogue is a bit too straight on the nose, but at the same point, I think that's the point of his character. So
100%. Yeah.
I mean, I just want to get your take on it, to be fair, for my listeners to hear. But the I suppose we call it the controversy of last week's episode, and I'm not talking about the way that the Coven of Witches perceive the Force in being a thread or anything like that, because I've addressed this quite a few times over the last week. I have no problem with the way that they did that because we already see in Star Wars across multiple different mediums that the Force is perceived in various different ways across the galaxy, much in the way that religion in our actual real world is perceived in many different ways in different cultures. So that's not what I have a problem with. And I didn't have a problem with this bit, so to speak. It's just the biggest controversy, the whole conceiving of the twins. Give me your quick take on that.
See, so I'm also not used to being on camera. So some of my eye rolls might be pretty hardcore as I'm like not used to sort of censoring myself in that way. But listen, and I talked about this. We didn't really go into that specific thing happening on our last episode, or on last week's episode that we put out on Krypton Alderaan, but I did talk about how I view this stuff as this witches whatever goings on has always existed in the Star Wars galaxy. We are privileged enough to now be getting to see that point of view. It's just that no one's ever told the story before, but that story did exist out there in the galaxy. So that is the way that I'm coming into these things. So when we see a coven of witches that uses the Force in a different way, I mean, we have the witches of Dathomir. So some of us are used to that already, but it's not something that like, it doesn't take away anything for me. And much like we don't know, again, it's episode 3 and we see it from one perspective. So we don't know exactly what happened. B, There's like one line of dialogue about it. So we don't know exactly what happened or what that means. B, we don't know how many times this has happened. This is like a special dark side force. We have no idea if that's true. There's no substantial lore about that other than Palpatine saying that, hinting at the life, or like the dark side is a pathway to things unnatural, and hinting at Anakin's conception and stuff like that. There's nothing else anywhere really that has like a drawn out thing that says this is what the Sith do, right, in creating children. And so C, we don't know how many times it's happened out in the galaxy before. We so what if she created life using the Force, dark side, or whatever else? That doesn't diminish Anakin. The prophecy that makes Anakin the chosen one, who wrote that prophecy? Like, could there not be other prophecies out there that depict other chosen ones, right? We're so used to seeing things from the Jedi's point of view in Star Wars that I think when we start to branch out like this, we're like, well, that couldn't happen there if it's already happened there. And people tend to, I shouldn't put words in anybody's mouth, but from my perspective, it's that like, just because this might have been the way Anakin was created, and that led to him being the chosen one for the Jedi, does not necessarily mean that it did not happen somewhere else out in the galaxy, or has not happened countless times out in the galaxy, right? Like, I could write a short story about like how this Force user and their partner couldn't conceive, so they decided to try to harness the Force to create a child, right? There's so many possibilities of how this could have happened in the galaxy in numerous amounts of time. So again, a bit long-winded, but this is the stuff that I cannot, it's hard for me to approach this stuff in the same way that maybe is getting a lot of hate, because I'm definitely open to Star Wars growing beyond what it has been and what I believe it to be. But to think that this is the only time this one specific thing has happened in the entire history of the galaxy, just because it happened in a movie created by George Lucas, to be fair, but like, that's just, you're putting Star Wars in a box that I don't think it deserves to be in. So I'm very okay with the way that so far they have led us to believe May and Osho were conceived, or at least that they were split in two somehow by the Force, either conceived by the Force, split in two by the Force, or that's a red herring, and neither of those things are true. We just don't know enough. But if we did know enough, I wouldn't have a problem with it. That's my take there. I kind of really like that idea, actually. I really like the idea of this is an ability that the Jedi look down on, and that maybe even Sidious thinks is a dark side ability. But because the Jedi are so good, bad, binary, there could be other people out in the galaxy using the Force in their own way, and that means using the Force in this way. So yeah, I'm open to this, and I'm open to more stories like this. How's that?
Nice. I mean, the way I just looked at it was, there is a difference between what happened with the twins and what happened with Anakin.
Yeah.
You know, we're led to believe that Anakin was an immaculate Force conception, whether it's part of the legends take that it was the Force itself bouncing back against Plagueis and Sidious, trying to turn the balance of the Force to the dark side in the galaxy, and therefore they created the chosen one, or whether the Force just went, yeah, the Force is the Force, it knows what's happening in the past, present, and the future, and therefore it took the perfect time to create life that knew that would bring balance for that point. Either way, we're led to believe that Anakin is essentially an immaculate conception.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no father was needed, nothing else was needed. The Force just did what it needed to do. You know, in that short sentence or two we got about the twins, you know, it sort of showed that Mother Anastasia sort of used some kind of magic, dark magic, or just magic in general, to manipulate things to create the life itself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a completely different thing, which is what I've been arguing with people the last week, is that it doesn't diminish the thing with Anakin, because these were people using magic to manipulate the Force to create life in some way.
Right.
This is not the Force itself giving an immaculate conception to do its own will. This is completely outside of that.
Yeah. And we know how Anakin's story ends. We know that the Force itself sees him as the chosen one based on, well, my interpretation of the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars and all that stuff. So it doesn't diminish his role because we know his role ended up being his role. Like, that's not, it was still one of the most important, galaxy saving roles in the history of the Star Wars galaxy. So like, you can't take that away just by doing whatever they're doing in the Acolyte.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Well, let's get into this week's episode then.
Yes.
So, just before we started recording, you said you just finished, doing your own episode about it, so you've still got a lot of your thoughts. I literally finished watching it like 15 minutes before we jumped on to do this. So,
Right.
So it's fresh for both of us. Let's get into it. So, first thoughts on this week's episode. What you got?
First thoughts. Here's the series of my first thoughts. I loved that ending so much. And then it ended, and I was like, oh, that was a short episode.
Yeah.
But you know what? The ending, like the last, maybe act 3 of the episode, for lack of a better term, felt like it was 30 minutes long to me. So for me personally, that ending, the ominous tones, the gravity of it made it feel so much longer. So I wasn't even, what's your phrase, fussed? I wasn't even fussed by the length of the episode. This episode 4 of The Acolyte is my favorite episode so far. That's my cold, tepid, hot take, whichever way you want to view it. But so far, this is it for me. And like you're saying, there's so much talk about the dialogue. This episode might have been a little slower, but I think there's a lot of intentionality in the way this episode was done to make us feel uncomfortable overall, to prepare us for what was coming at the end. And I think Yord is just like, I mean, to take a phrase from Jecki, he's just Yord, right? I said on Krypton to Alderaan, like, he gives me the vibes of having never left the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Like, he carries himself. He carries himself and he talks exactly the way he thinks he's supposed to as a Jedi of the High Republic, who we might be dipping our toes into like their downfall and their arrogance. And he kind of just, I get that vibe from him. He's never gone out in the galaxy. He's never experienced anything. And he walks and talks like he thinks Jedi should. So that's where that's the way I'm reading it. Like, that's where his dialogue is coming from. Like, very stuffy and snooty and Yord. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm standing on some of that stuff. What did you think of the episode? I was super curious to hear. I was listening to your past reviews of stuff on and off your podcast. What's your take?
Yeah, it was. That last 2 minutes is everything I've been waiting for this series to start kicking off with. Everyone knows I'm a Sith fan. It's what I love more about, and it's the least thing we sort of get about Star Wars is everything from the Sith. So to finally have that kick in, and then to be so disappointed it was only a glimpse at the end. Obviously, that's where we're going to kick off next week's episode, is right where that sort of
I hope so.
been, or it better be anyway after that dramatic end. But that was everything I've been waiting for this series so far. The rest of it, it did feel like it. Yeah, I mean, it was a short episode, shortest one we've had so far. Minus credits, just a touch under 30 minutes, I think. And it did feel like a quick episode as well. Again, I liked the sort of going back and forth between May and Quima, the dude that she's
Kamir?
with.
Yeah.
Kamir, sorry. I just thought of the spelling in my head, and I don't know why I just said it like that. That's why. And then obviously the fact that Osha's with the Jedi, and they're sort of both tracking down to try and get to Kelnaka. I'd liked a little bit of that, even if I found it was a bit slow at times and it kind of needed a pacing up. The whole scene with the giant bug in the forest that they just kill instantly, that seemed like a wasted scene a little bit, because I thought maybe the rest of them would wake up and there was sort of like be a big incident where they've all got to defend themselves and stuff like that. That turned out to be a little bit of a red herring, I think. I still have a theory that for some reason his name's gone out of my head. Khmer could be the master. I heard this theory over the last couple of weeks, and the fact that he went with May into the necessity, went with her into the forest, and then happens to just disappear at the time when she's going off on her own. And then and then obviously the master turns up at the end.
Yeah.
So he's giving that sort of vibes of where he's passing himself off to be someone completely different and a bit of an alcoholic and stuff like this or whatever that we sort of learn, but then he's like completely different to that in on the other side of himself. So disappointed that Kalnaka died without us getting really anything from him in terms of a fight scene or anything. I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves from the trailers we've had about the Acolyte, there are more flashbacks to come, and we are going to see more of him, because there is a bit of a mystery there that in his little home that he'd made, that there were obviously the markings from the Witch's Coven and stuff like that on the walls.
Yep.
So I do believe we will see more of him, but just in flashbacks rather than now. So that was a disappointment that we basically was killed off, and we didn't really get anything in the modern times with him, but. To see all these sort of other Jedi turn up and be with them, and they're all sort of hunting down, and then they just look in awe about, like, what the hell is that? As the Master turns up, that was it, wasn't it? It was sort of like you just see this ominous person floating in the background behind Osha, and just lands behind her, and she looks frozen in fear.
Yeah,
and then he's just like, "See you later," just wipes her to the side. They all go to attack him, and he just knocks them all back instantly.
Yep.
I mean, that was literally, these last 2-3 minutes of this episode are what made it my favourite, to be fair.
Yeah.
Simply because I suppose my biggest gripe about this series so far is not necessarily the dialogue or any potential controversy. It's just the fact that this was sold to us as a story from the bad guys' point of view, from the Sith point of view almost. And we've spent half a series now with barely any of that being the story. We've been given a little bit of backstory to May and her situation, but even in this episode, she's ready to turn so easily. She's got one glimpse of her long lost sister that it's been 16 years, and she's ready to give all that up. She's like, sod the master, you know, I don't need to do his bidding here. I can, Osha being alive has changed everything for me. See you later. And she turned so quickly. Like, what kind of acolyte are you?
Yeah.
Like, if you want to join the dark side, what the fuck are you doing? So that has been my biggest disappointment about everything, is the fact that this is supposed to be a story from the bad guys' point of view, and we're going to get more backstory to what happened on Brendok with those 4 Jedi for sure, because there's definitely something from the story missing from last week's flashback. But the fact that we're halfway through now and we've barely seen any dark side or Sith point of view or story, that's what these last 4 episodes for me need to be, whilst cleaning up and filling in the gaps of the Jedi story.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I do remember quite a few interviews with Leslie Headland when she was talking about the show. She had said that, like, we're getting a show in a timeline where the Jedi are not necessarily going to be the good guys, but they're not necessarily going to be the bad guys. I think the way she put it is that they're going to be like the antagonists to the bad guys. So I think we have set that up really well. And we're also starting to see the flaws in the Jedi that lead from, like, the High Republic, maybe the more pristine, what we believe the Jedi to be, to the prequel era Jedi, which, as you said, arrogant, couldn't smell a Sith right under their noses, and in fact said that was impossible. Ki-Adi-Mundi, who I don't think that's a mistake, that they put him in this now to live through this, and then he's the one on the council in Phantom Menace that says impossible, a Sith has not existed for 1,000 years. So I kind of like that framing as well. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if now we get more of the dark side stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if this, like, the master just creates a blank slate. I think we have seen almost everything from the trailers and I'm not sure any of the Jedi make it out of there alive. So we might be getting Osha and May off with the Master, right? Or him manipulating Osha to join. I love having these conversations because I really loved the bit about May saying Osha being alive changes everything. My allegiance is to her, not to your master, she says to Kamira after just calling him my master. So I really like that juxtaposed to Osha's reaction. They kind of had like opposite and contradictory reactions from my perspective. Like May is the one to say, I'm going to turn myself in for my sister. Osha is the one that is ready to run. She does not, the Jedi it's the Jedi's job to bring her in, not mine. So I really, there's something like, obviously there's a Star Wars trope there of Saul saying there's still good in her, which is also interesting because we're not getting that from the family member. That dialogue is coming from Saul, who has guilt, regret about what actually happened there. And so I really like that framing. I really like the framing of like them flipping on us a little bit. Like we think May is the bad guy, and all of the trailers, May is all we knew. We didn't know about Osha. So now we've got these twins, good side, light side, and that's kind of flipping in this episode, which I really enjoyed. In an episode that is supposed to make us feel uncomfortable. I'm a huge fan of horror. I love horror. And so this episode was really my jam because we did not have a moment's peace. Yes, there was, I've seen people talking about the scenes are long and they're like walking on the mountain. I also love Lost, so I'm no stranger to that. But every emotional moment in this episode is interrupted. There's no lingering with the characters until the very end, until the master, as you're calling, is that the actual his official title on the language we have so far?
I believe so. I mean, I don't think he's got any other name. He's just constantly called the Master. So.
Yeah. So once that person is finally descending, actually, once May is in Kelnaka's hut and says he's here, and it just goes dark, then we start to get to linger on people. So I really like that we were not allowed to feel comfortable or linger in those emotional moments with Jecki and Osha, and Jecki putting her hand on Osha's shoulder and then but immediately cut away. We don't get to spend any time with that, which I really enjoyed. And the bug scene, it I think goes along with that a little bit in that, yeah, these twins might have been created by the dark side, and they might have a connection to the dark side. And so when the Jedi are walking through that part of the forest and they say it's rotten, Osha's the only one that connects with anything. And I think that is something that can be used by the master to manipulate her in the future. Look, everything you touch, everything you love dies. These Jedi, your family, look what just happened in the forest back there, right? You were the only one who could connect to this creature, and because of you, it's dead. And we know that Osha feels regret over that happening. She says it. So there's a lot of little things, I think, in this episode that I really, really enjoyed that I think are leading to the bigger story of this, like these twins not wanting to be connected to the darkness, but it's their destiny to be connected to the darkness. And maybe a theme or thesis of the show is like, what is it? What is destiny? Is the Force determining your destiny? And because you were created maybe by the dark side, this is the path you have to go down? Or can you pull a thread and go down that? So I don't know. There's from my perspective, so a lot happened in this episode, and I know that maybe it felt a little slow, but this is what I'm talking about. Like the stuff that I like, and the stuff that makes Star Wars special to me, and the stuff that makes horror special to me, came together in this episode that made me end up really enjoying it. And so when we get to the end and we see the master and he floats down, super amazing. Also, we don't know many Jedi who can do stuff like that, or Force users in general, right? Like flight is not, in fact, it's discussed in like some of the High Republic books that like not many Jedi can do that unless you're taking something like the Barash vow and you're just giving yourself into the Force. So the amount of power that there is incredible. And then I was convinced that it was Khmer until the end. It just doesn't look right. The height is right, but the hand is. This is like super nitpicky, nerdy, and I will probably end up being wrong, but that's how I felt at the end. Like, oh, I don't think it is Khmer. Up until that point of this episode, I was convinced it was him, like a Kaiser Soze moment where he's been playing the fool and is actually this like incredible Force user.
I know what you mean. I mean, he just looks to have the same sort of build, though. That sort of skinny, slight build, but with a little bit of tall to him. So, yeah, I mean, he's probably my odds-on favourite at the moment, rather than introducing a new character that we've got to try and get behind their motivations. It's,
sure, 100%.
The wolf in sheep's clothing sort of thing, isn't it? So, one thought I had about you were talking there about Osha connecting to the animal in the forest and whether that she's maybe permanently connected to the dark side, and because she was in that part of the forest, because she obviously does talk in the sort of second half of this episode about starting to be able to feel things and connect to things again from sort of like a Jedi Force point of view.
Right.
I just wondered if maybe it was more to do with her proximity to May that caused her to start feeling that again.
Interesting.
In the fact that, they have the connection as twins, and the fact that when she thought May had died all those years ago and she never really took to her Jedi training, she couldn't let go of the loss of family. And maybe she needs to be around May to have that connection and have that sort of Force connection with her as them being twins that then doesn't allow her to be able to operate completely properly or stably outside of that. And then the closer she gets in proximity to May, the more their natural connection comes into focus that allows her to then start feeling those powers and everything around her again.
Oh, I really like that. I really like that. I did not think about that at all, but I really like that idea. Like the power of the two, right? It's it's what they were supposed to be. I guess it's what they were created for. That makes so much sense. Yeah, I would love if that were true.
I certainly hope it goes down something like that route. But even her being made through the dark side of the Force, so to speak, or dark magic, therefore means that she connects more to the dark side and stuff. And then, like you said, the Master using that to sway her to come away with him, I think. And even one of the theories being that the Master himself helped Mother Anaïsa to help create the twins in the first place, that he could then use them in the future as his acolytes, so to speak, or apprentices, as a duo together. So maybe that's why she was able to feel that in a dark place in the forest, so to speak. But we mentioned him earlier. I want to get to talk about this particular scene with their own little, like, sort of under council, so to speak. But Ki-Adi-Mundi making a little appearance here, looking very, very different. Obviously, a very different voice as well from the more experienced voice, I guess, we got to see in the prequels and the Clone Wars. What was your take of this particular cameo? Because they could have picked several people. We all know that Yoda's around at this time. Even for some reason, his bloody name's got out of my head. But Ahsoka's sort of master.
Oh yeah, Plo Koon.
That's it. I don't know why his name went out of my head, but he's around at this time. He's certainly old enough. So. But they settled on Ki-Adi-Mundi, not everyone's favourite Jedi, to be fair.
No, least favourite, maybe.
Yeah, and you did mention as well about the fact that, he sits on that council in 100 years' time or 110 years' time, or whatever, and sort of sits around and goes, it's impossible that the Sith could be around. They haven't been seen for a millennia. And therefore, I mean, I had a theory about this anyway, in terms of, we see that, Venestra and stuff like that, they're not necessarily part of the High Council. So it did make me wonder from the conversation they had in this episode, if one, they're hiding the deaths of Torbin and Indara and stuff from the High Council, because they said if they notify the High Council, they've got to notify the Senate, and they don't want their political enemies to know that that's happened to the Jedi, which to me is already indicating the sort of the Jedi shift towards more political views rather than the will of the Force in the first place. But the fact that if they keep this from the High Council, and then Ki-Adi-Mundi's maybe not involved as much in the rest of this, he was just a throwaway cameo, and he's kept out of the loop, then there's no reason why they would necessarily know in 100 years' time that the Sith had appeared at this point, because anyone that's involved in this, we know Venestra is going to go out there and get involved. We've seen her lightsaber whip appear in the trailers. And if all of them are just obliterated at some point, or by the end of season 2, if we still get a season 2. But basically, by the end of this series coming to its end, anyone involved has been destroyed by the Sith, and therefore their secret is intact for the next 100 years. But your thoughts on this sort of mini council that we got to see here with Venestra and Ki-Adi-Mundi and Sol?
Yeah. I'm ready for them to make Ki-Adi-Mundi everyone's favorite Jedi. No, I'm just kidding. That's too hot of a take. No, this is all Vernestra in the first episode said, we need to keep this quiet. We need to keep this discreet. Our justice swift, something like that. And the language about like, do you know what it would be like if this? You know what would happen if this got out that one of our former Padawans is killing our own? Oh, it would be our political allies or our political enemies would use this against us. It's like, okay, the Jedi are already lost. Yeah. They're already lost to the politics of this situation. So, which is a huge bummer to see for Venestra, because she's the one character from the High Republic books that are set 100 years before this show. She's the one character we know spanning that time frame, and she's very different in the books, obviously, because 100 years has passed. But it's very sad to see her have gotten to this point, and now they're talking about keeping it a secret even from the Jedi High Council, because then it would be bad politically for the Jedi. So now there's secrets within these two different councils, under council, as you're saying, like within the Jedi Order itself. This is disastrous. This is this is just like the temple on Coruscant should not exist. They should, it's just too close to politics. Get out of there. So there's a couple of different ways. I guess there's a couple of different ways that I see this going. There's one way that I would like it to go that is probably super unrealistic, which is that Ki-Adi-Mundi is made aware of all of this and keeps it a secret. Like, this is the massive cover-up that lasts 100 years that he knew was going on and has kept a secret.
Making him an even bigger douche than he already is.
Exactly. That is not the way it's played, certainly in the Phantom Menace. So that's probably like a hard sell. But whether it's then just becomes like a cover up from Vernestra who finds the truth out, or like you're saying, everyone who goes in search of this meets their end and they never get an answer. And there's no evidence to point to a red blade of any kind having reappeared in the galaxy until the Phantom Menace. So, yeah, I love this. I think this all points to the show being labeled as a mystery, which I also really enjoy. We don't know how it's going to go, obviously, but the fact that there is a cover-up to some extent by the Jedi Order, by a Jedi Order that we know is getting bad. Like we're on the edge of the spectrum of entering this like very negative territory for the Jedi. And so that this is all happening. The council, there's a separate mini council and they're covering stuff up and they don't even want to let the other council know. And she's, like you said, she's going to go into the field and find stuff or not find stuff. But I do think either way, I do think it's maybe not, it makes sense, but it is interesting. I think it's purposeful that Ki-Adi-Mundi was the one that they put in this, because he is the one in 100 years to say, that's impossible. Literally, those are his words to the person who just saw and fought Darth Maul, right? Like, he is so arrogant. The people who sit on that council are so arrogant that a Jedi is coming to them and saying, this just happened. And they're saying, that's impossible, you idiot. That couldn't have been what, right? Like, it's their downfall. But I think it's very purposeful that he's the one they put in this. There was a moment where we see, and now I'm going to discredit myself as a fan because I don't remember the species, but Plo Koon, a species character in this episode, and I was like, oh, is that Plo Koon? It's not. And he is with the Jedi in the field on Kofar. So I think he will be one of whoever, I can't remember that character's name. It was named, but I do think he will be one of the ones to bite the dust, so to speak. But yeah, I was super excited to see Plo Koon, and then it wasn't Plo Koon, but we did get Ki-Adi-Mundi, which, like, who's excited for that? sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, anyone watching or listening that Ki-Adi-Mundi is your favorite Jedi. But yeah, I do think it was purposeful because he's such an arrogant jerk.
That's a fair way of looking at it, in terms of, because he is the one, as we said, that makes that comment in 100 years, that they throw him in here in the middle of this mystery to have whether a small role or a big role to come. Right. I don't think it's going to be a big role, obviously, but
No,
in terms of just him being a part of this and maybe knows about it, there is some potential deliberateness there. So, yeah, definitely an interesting way to look at it. A bit sad, we're not probably going to get any other cameos of anyone that we do know is alive, whether it be Plo Koon. I'd love to see it, maybe a little Yoda cameo right at the end of the series when sort of things are maybe calmed down and he just has a quick word with, say, Sol and Vanestra that survive at the end, for example. Has a quick word with them, nothing to be too much, but I think everyone would love to see a proper Yoda cameo. I don't think we're going to get it because they've told us that, and why would they? There's no reason to throw Yoda into the middle of this, but
for sure.
Anyone else you'd want to see have a cameo in this little series?
Ooh, good question. Oh man, so many. So it's sad that it's set 100 years out from the books, from the High Republic books, because it's been my favorite era of Star Wars reading those books, and there's so many great characters, including Vernestra's first Padawan, Imri, one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. And so I'm not sure if there's anybody that bridges the age gap here that I know of, besides, like you're saying, Yoda, which I could do without. But yeah, I think I think they've said, like, if we have a season 2, it's not out of the question to bring Yoda in. Man, yeah, I don't know who else bridges that gap besides Yoda and Plo Koon, and I think Ki-Adi-Mundi, it was a surprise, maybe an unwelcome one, to see him because I don't think we knew that his species lives that long. So it'd be interesting to see if they play around with any more of that, like something that a species that we maybe don't know as much about that we end up seeing in this that is then alive in the prequel era. But I can't really put a finger on it now, I guess. But I wish that it was set a little bit more in the past so we could see more characters from the High Republic, like the High Republic books.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It would have been nice to see a bit more of that brought into it, but since they're already covering the majority of it in there, sort of, the novels and comics, I suppose they didn't want to delve too much into the middle of that.
For sure.
Just showing, going halfway between Height of the High Republic and the Skywalker saga, I guess, isn't too bad of a time frame to have in, because it just puts it just outside of reach for most characters that we know on both ends in terms of High Republic and prequels. So
it's completely new space, like completely new. We can just have fun with it. We can play with Star Wars in it. We can do all of these things without like interrupting other existing canon stuff.
Yeah. And obviously, I've had lots of conversation with people about who, if we're going to see Sith in this series, who we would want to see. Obviously, too early for the likes of Palpatine, and a lot of people saying, I think this is the issue, is that technically Plagueis being Palpatine's master isn't actually even canon. He talks about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. We had the now non-canon Legends book of Darth Plagueis, where he's Palpatine's master, but never actually ever confirmed it is canon as we stand now that he's his master. So saying that he could have been in this because he would then go on to Palpatine afterwards, or Darth Tenebrous, which was Plagueis' master, which again we know from the book, and we do know that Tenebrous does exist in Sith lore because he is named as one of the Sith squads in Rise of Skywalker. As they have done with the like of Revan and stuff like that. So we know that these Sith exist in name in the Star Wars universe, but we don't know that it's the same iterations that we've had from Legends and things like that. So I can sit around all day and go, I wish it was Tenebrous or Plagueis or something like that. But we don't even know if it's the same order that we got from Legends. But just excited the fact that this Sith is a bit different. Obviously the helmet, as you said, the sort of horror approach to the helmet and the floating. Almost, it reminded me of Magneto in a way from Marvel, the way he just kind of floats around like that with a cape on and stuff.
That was so good. It's been playing in my head just behind May, just descending on all of them. That's so good, man. I loved that.
Just OSHA just freezing in terror
Yeah,
almost
OSHA.
about
Sorry,
the
I think I
whole.
said May. Yeah.
But obviously, halfway through, 4 more to go. Any final thoughts on this episode, or anything that you really want to see for the remaining 4 episodes?
I really, I can speculate all day long, and I don't think there's anything specific I want to see happen. It's got me really excited. It's got me really excited for Star Wars. I'm really excited to see where it goes. I'm pretty in for the series, so I'm hoping we pick up where we left off last week. I can't wait to see the other flashbacks with Kalnaka. In one of the scenes, it looks like he's kind of like might be responsible for Torben's scars. So there's just we do have a bit more. I mean, we have 4 more episodes to go, and we have a couple more things from the trailers. But overall, we haven't seen anything of what's coming next. So I'm just super excited to see where it goes.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, it's probably not up there as obviously an all-time great at this moment in time. Who knows? I mean, I've been kept saying that whilst Andor overall is viewed as a good series, that was a slow burner that took a while to get going. I don't really think Andor sort of really kicked into gear until the prison episodes.
No, and short.
Yeah.
The first couple of episodes, very short. So we're on kind of a similar trajectory.
Though Andor did have a few more episodes that it was allowed to tell its story through. I think it was 12 episodes or something. So, but I just approach it to that, for all we know, this second half of the series could ramp up and be I'm hoping, some of the best Star Wars we see, especially if it's going to involve the Sith a lot more. Because that's what I'm excited about. Everyone knows I'm a Sith boy. I will play, if May doesn't want to do it, I'll pledge my allegiance to the Master. I'll be his acolyte for sure. Right. So if she wants to bugger off with Osha, I'll take her place. Don't worry about that.
All right.
Give me a call, Master. I'm in.
Yeah.
But any final thoughts then for the Acolyte?
I think I've covered it. I think I've expressed my excitement enough. But thanks so much for having me on. This was great. I thank you. I really appreciate having the space to talk about it, especially with this episode, which, like I said, was my favorite episode so far. So yeah, I was ready and willing to gush about this with you. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Been a thrill to have you on, Joey, as always. I know we always have a good conversation, so I was definitely looking forward to having you on to be able to chat about it. Just any big things coming up for Krypton to order on?
Ooh, we're almost at 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which has been a big push lately. So yeah, if you're interested in checking us out on YouTube, Krypton to Alderaan, head over there. If you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment. I love chatting in the comments about this stuff. So yeah, that's the next big thing. We're at like 992 right now. So it's really like we're on the edge. So yeah, that's been super exciting, exciting to ramp up to. And that's a big milestone in YouTube terms. So that's what we got going on.
Absolutely. Anything planned for after the Acolyte? What have you got coming up after that?
That is a great question. We've been like playing around with some ideas of stuff, and we might return to some content, some Star Wars stuff that we didn't get the chance to cover. But yeah, it's always the struggle of when these shows end, what to do in between, especially when we don't know when the next thing is coming, right? Like Disney, Lucasfilm, it would be nice for you to let us know what the next thing is and when. But yeah, we're playing around with some ideas and doing some brainstorming. I think we'll end up doing like a Acolyte retrospective once the show is actually over and complete, once we have the complete picture. But yeah, other than that, it's up in the air. Maybe some X-Men 97 because I really loved that. So yeah, there's we're not going to run out of content, but we're just trying to figure out what to do next.
Nice. I mean, yeah, I've got halfway through the Acolyte, still got the rest of the series to cover. I'm covering The Boys, as we know, at the same time. Deadpool Wolverine coming at the end of July.
That's right.
Be covering that. And then I'm going to be taking a break for a month, 6 weeks, because that's about the time my baby's due at the beginning of August.
Yeah.
So I will be taking a break, and then I'm likely to hit back with some new episodes around the Rings of Power Season 2.
Nice.
So
with a new co-host. The new little co-host.
Yeah. I thought you were about to offer yourself then, to be fair. And then I was like, no, you're talking about the baby. I was like, fair enough. Yeah, you might do it. I mean, me from and Brandon from Clan Mandalorian, he's got a little baby that's due a few weeks after mine, so we've been talking about co-hosting some episodes with the babies.
Nice.
And just seeing what happens there. We've got some exciting new co-hosts. But yeah, I mean, Jerry, thank you, buddy, so much for coming on. Just tell everyone at home exactly where we can find your podcast.
Yeah, you can find Krypton to Alderaan anywhere you find podcasts. It hits all of those sources. We're doing a lot. Obviously, we're doing a lot on YouTube these days. So you can head over there and hit subscribe or give us a listen and then decide whether to hit subscribe. But we're doing most of our stuff on YouTube. And you can hit me up on Instagram too, Krypton to Alderaan on Instagram. And that's really where I do most of my, content related stuff. So
I think that's where most of us do it now, isn't it? Because X are starting to charge everyone to post. Facebook may as well be dead in the dust.
Yep.
Either TikTok or Instagram is where we're at. So that's exactly, to be fair, where you can find me.
Yeah.
If you've got this far into the episode and you haven't subscribed yet, why? Why have you got all the way through and you haven't pressed like or subscribed yet? So Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and I'm going to start trying to do a little bit more streaming on Twitch again as well. I haven't done any for a little while. I keep going in and out of it, to be fair, based on tiredness or time frame. So try and get back on there. But give us a like, give us a follow. I will be back next week to discuss the next episode of The Acolyte and the Boys. But until then, everyone, as always,
the Force will be with you, always.
Thanks for tuning in to the Galactic Core Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. But until next time, go get your geek on.